Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to the Military Reporter channel. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's get started. Donald Trump recently stated that the issue of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was raised during the negotiations. The question of who should own the station will be discussed after the start of the peace process and the preparation of a peace agreement. If you ask for my opinion, I would say that the Russians don't actually need the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Currently, the Russians control the territories of LPR, DPR, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. They have already found a solution for supplying and supporting these territories with electricity. From this perspective, the Russians don't need the electricity from the Zaporizhzhia plant. If the Russians retain control over this power plant, the only thing they will be able to do is supply electricity to Ukraine, which means the Russians would get money from Ukraine. Obviously, the Ukrainians don't want this. After the war, the post-war period will be very difficult for Ukraine. Even though many Western countries and Russia itself will likely invest money to help rebuild Ukraine, this will still be a very challenging time. Therefore, gaining control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant could be a very important step toward restoring Ukraine's economy. Right now, the negotiations are not about exchanging the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant for, let's say, the Svatov direction. Instead, the talks might be about the Russians allowing the Ukrainians to establish control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in exchange for the city of Pokrovsk or perhaps the city of Sloviansk. As you know, there are still many territories that the Russians aim to take to restore complete control over the Donetsk region. That's why the deal might look something like this. This scenario seems very likely. Even though we don't know exactly what kind of negotiations are taking place, one thing is clear: Russia will demand ironclad security guarantees, including Ukraine's neutral status when resolving the conflict. This was stated by Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Gryenko. Another important update: according to the United States and Donald Trump, the negotiation process and the first official talks between Trump and Putin may take place tomorrow, on March 18, 2025. This is very interesting. Now let's move back to the front lines. Despite all these political talks and negotiations, we know for sure that the Russians continue their offensive operations. They are actively hunting and destroying Ukrainian forces along the entire line of combat contact. For example, during the past 24 hours, the Russians discovered a concentration of Ukrainian forces in the Chernihiv region. As a result of an Iskander missile strike, this large concentration of Ukrainian forces was destroyed. The Ukrainians lost up to 2 trucks, up to 30 soldiers, up to 65 fighters of the Ukrainian armed forces. The question is, what were the Ukrainians doing in this part of the Chernihiv region? Maybe they were planning to carry out another massive drone attack deep into Russian territory. Or maybe the Russians are about to begin an offensive operation in this area as well. A few days ago, Putin mentioned that it's time to create a security zone. The only security zone the Russians need is a no-fly zone for Ukrainian drones that are attempting to attack the Russian capital, Moscow. Now let's move further and discuss the situation in the Sumy direction. The Ukrainians have decided to copy the new Russian approach to securing main supply lines. Today, the first images emerged showing that the Ukrainians have begun building defensive nests around key supply lines near the city of Sumy. This will allow the Ukrainians to protect their vehicles and reduce losses from Russian FPV drone attacks. This is a tactic we've already seen the Russians use around the cities of Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. Now the Ukrainians are trying to implement the same strategy. If the special military operation continues, it's likely that we'll see these defensive nests along the entire line of contact. Both sides will likely strengthen their supply lines to reduce losses during transportation, evacuation, rotation, and other operations. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. Over the past 24 hours, the most intense clashes took place near the village of Gueva. Yesterday, the fighting in this area was particularly fierce. Late in the evening, the Russians published a video showing how they managed to establish control, not complete control, but they raised their flag using a drone in the southernmost part of the settlement of Gueva. Of course, this doesn't mean that the Russians have completely secured the village. However, sources are saying that this was more of a media attack. According to Ukrainian sources, the main message behind this action is that the Russians have established complete air control over the area. In the past, I didn't understand why both the Russians and the Ukrainians were trying to raise flags using drones. But now, the message is clear. The purpose of these actions is to demonstrate that the airspace is already under complete control. The message is simple. You no longer have any chance to bring drones into this area or to protect your troops with drones during another Russian attack. That's why we believe that, in the very near future, the Ukrainians, once they realize that they have no chance to regain air control, will be forced to fall back toward the settlement of Garely. This information was also confirmed by pro-Russian sources. Furthermore, several military map analysts have adjusted their maps in favor of the Russians. Maybe today, the Ministry of Defense will confirm this information. However, the official Telegram channel of the Group of Forces North has not yet made any statement about the situation. For now, this territory remains covered by the fog of war, but we believe that in the very near future, the Russians will establish complete control over this territory. Regarding the city of Sumy and the Sumy agglomeration, we continue to receive many videos and updates about the trophies the Russians have captured since the beginning of the last stage of the Sumy counteroffensive operation. Hundreds of vehicles, weapons, and other military equipment have been captured by the Russians. This includes armored vehicles, weapons, grenades, grenade launchers, FPV drones. The Russians continue clearing the territory and capturing more and more equipment. With these captured weapons, the Russians could potentially create an army equipped entirely with NATO standard weapons. Essentially, they could organize a new type of force using just NATO equipment. Clearly, the Ukrainians have suffered significant losses. It will take them some time to restore their combat capabilities. We continue to receive very interesting updates from the northern Kharkiv direction, where the main clashes are taking place along the Oskol River, particularly on the Ukrainian side of the river. During the past 24 hours, according to various sources, the Russians have managed to significantly improve their positions near the village of Kamyanka. The first reports of this type emerged yesterday from pro-Ukrainian sources. However, for some reason, the Ukrainian sources marked the area as contested rather than confirming Russian control, likely to avoid causing panic. Today, however, military analysts and pro-Russian sources confirmed that the Russians have indeed broken through the Ukrainian defense belt near Kamyanka, improving their positions and taking additional territory under control. From this perspective, the Russians are now trying to encircle Kamyanka and will most likely succeed in capturing the village. If the situation continues developing at this pace, the battle for Kamyanka will likely be over in a matter of days, not weeks. Now let's discuss the situation in the Toretsk direction. According to the latest information, for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the city of Toretsk, pro-Ukrainian sources have admitted that the situation in the area is very difficult. According to Ukrainian analysts, there are no longer any zones in the city under firm Ukrainian control. Currently, around 70% of the city is under the strong control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Around 30% is marked as a contested or gray zone, meaning there are no stable Ukrainian positions in that part of the city. The most concerning development is that the Ukrainians have confirmed that a cauldron has formed near the stadium, where Ukrainian forces have been trapped. We don't know the exact number of Ukrainian forces that have been caught in this cauldron, but this information has been confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources as well. It's clear that the Ukrainians are paying a very high price to hold this settlement. Finally, we've observed a surge in activity from the armed forces of the Russian Federation in several other directions. The Russians are continuing their offensive operations and putting pressure on Ukrainian forces across the front. Russian Federation in the Konstantinivka direction. Over the past 12 to 24 hours, we've received numerous reports from the Konstantinivka direction. The Russians are actively trying to secure and clear the village of Teresivka from multiple directions. All these reports point to one thing: most likely, the Russians are preparing to launch an offensive operation in this area with the goal of shortening the distance between their current positions and the Konstantinivka agglomeration, or at least the Kostiantynivka-Bakhmut reserve. We are witnessing increased Russian activity, and we expect an offensive in the very near future toward the settlement of Toretsk. Most likely, the Russians will also attempt to attack the village of Oleksandrivka, which is located slightly to the northeast of the original positions held by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Heavy clashes continue in the settlement of Lysivka. Today, Russian sources published a video showing one Russian soldier fighting against 3 Ukrainian soldiers, and the Russian soldier emerged as the winner of the battle. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map because the clashes took place precisely at this location. The Russians have managed to seize the initiative and are now trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back. Next, let's discuss the situation near Vasilivka. The Russians continue their offensive operations in this area, getting closer and closer to the settlement of Vasilivka. Today, we've seen several map adjustments from different pro-Russian and neutral sources. Most importantly, the same information has been confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. According to Ukrainian reports, the tree line between the settlement of Vasilivka and the frontline positions of the Russian armed forces is now marked as a gray zone or a contested area. This indicates that the Russians are actively trying to penetrate the settlement using this route. The main goal of the Russians in this area is to establish control over the farms located in the northwestern part of the village. As we discussed in previous reports, the Russians' primary target in this direction is the settlement of Kamari. If the Russians manage to secure this area, it will lead to significant problems for the Ukrainian armed forces operating in the villages of Adviivka, Bakhmut, and Rozivka. This would effectively create another cauldron, a pocket where Ukrainian forces could be encircled and cut off. To fully secure this cauldron, the Russians will need to intensify their activity toward the Dnipro region ** in the north. They must take control of this area to complete the encirclement. If they succeed, we will likely see the same outcome as we have seen in Kakhovka and other towns and villages in the southern Donetsk direction. Probably the most important updates over the last 24 hours have come from the Zaporizhzhia direction. If you recall, over the past few days, we've received numerous reports from various sources, including pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, and neutral sources, suggesting that the Russians had managed to break through the Ukrainian defensive lines in the area of Mala Sherbeki. There were reports that the Russians had captured several territories and streets. However, as of March 16th, there was no video evidence to confirm these claims. By the morning of March 17th, we received the first video from the central part of Mala Sherbeki. This video, published by Ukrainian sources, shows Ukrainian forces conducting drone attacks on Russian units and soldiers of the Russian armed forces inside the village. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map because one of the episodes was geolocated to this specific point. This confirms that the information about the situation in the settlement was accurate. The Russians have indeed advanced and secured territory within the village. The Russian offensive operation in this direction is gaining momentum. That's it for today's update. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and have a great day. Goodbye.